"You've been fined $80,000, the woman announced, waving a glossy envelope like she was delivering a party invitation instead of a threat. I stared at her mid-muck, holding a shovel, my boots caked in the same stuff she probably thought I tracked into society, and blinked. "For what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Livestock," she sniffed. "This isn't a barnyard." I looked around at the stables, the fenced pasture, the 3 horses munching peacefully on hay under a big sign that said, "Welcome to Morgan Ranch, established 1947. Then I looked back at her, standing on my land on the ranch my grandfather left me, dressed like she'd come to inspect a beauty salon. That was the moment I knew this HOA war wasn't going to be won with common sense. It would be won with strategy, and I had plenty of that. The ranch had been in my family for generations, originally spanning 100 acres before developments slowly whittled it down to 10. Still, it was beautiful, functional, and legally zoned for agricultural use. My grandfather, God rest his stubborn soul, fought tooth and nail to keep the developers at bay. He let the HOA inch closer, but never onto the ranch itself. His will was clear. I'd inherit the land, the horses, the equipment, and his battle with what he always called those clipboard-carrying tyrants. I thought he was being dramatic. Turns out he was being generous. I had only been moved in for 2 weeks when the first letter came. At first, I thought it was a welcome packet. It was printed on fancy paper, embossed with the HOA crest, and delivered in a thick white envelope, hand-dropped into my mailbox. Inside were a list of fines, violation codes, and something called a livestock penalty schedule. I laughed out loud when I saw the total, $15,000. For what? I muttered to myself, apparently for unauthorized agricultural activity, disruptive animal sounds, and pasture without HOA-approved fencing. That last one was particularly cute considering the fencing was custom installed by my grandfather 2 decades ago and reinforced with steel posts. I called the number on the letter and was immediately transferred to someone named Karen. Yes, actually Karen. She confirmed she was the HOA president and said she'd already scheduled a hearing about my violations. "Your property is visible from 3 lots, and your activities disturb the aesthetic harmony," she said like she was reading off a script. I told her my land wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. She told me she'd have to escalate the situation. I told her to bring it. 3 days later, Karen showed up in person, clipboard in hand, red heels sinking into the soft dirt of my driveway, and an expression like she was smelling roadkill. She pointed to my barn. "That structure is unapproved." She pointed to my horses. "Livestock not registered with the HOA." She even pointed to my scarecrow. A silly decoration my grandfather dressed in a poncho and cowboy hat. "Visual nuisance," she said. That one really got me. I offered her a cup of coffee just to see what she'd say. She declined, obviously, but not before asking if my horses were vaccinated against community spread. I wasn't even sure what that meant. Maybe she thought equine flu was going to take out her poodle. But then came the real blow. One morning I woke up to find a giant laminated sign staked into the ground at the entrance to my driveway. In all caps it read, "Notice, HOA fines pending, property in Violaton." It was double-sided bright red, and right next to my mailbox. The nerve of it shocked me, but what made me actually angry was how it rattled my horses. That morning my gelding, Thunder, spooked hard enough to break a section of the gate. That wasn't just harassment. It was interference. I took the sign down and marched it right back to the HOA office, a glorified shack attached to the clubhouse pool. The office smelled like lavender and resentment. Karen was there, of course, sipping iced tea and pretending not to see me until I dropped the sign onto her desk, like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom. "You trespassed," I said. She smirked. "Community access overrides individual barriers." I laughed. "Not on zoned property, it doesn't." Her smirk twitched. She didn't know I'd already checked with the county office and had a certified land use map in my truck, proving I was completely outside their governance zone. That's when she pulled out a new letter, this one upping my fine total to $80,000. Apparently, I had refused to comply, and that triggered a full retroactive assessment. I asked her if she'd like to explain that to a judge. She said she was happy to go to court. I said great, because I already had a lawyer. That wiped the smug off her face fast. What made it worse, better, was that I wasn't even trying to antagonize anyone. I wasn't throwing loud parties. I wasn't parking junk cars on the lawn. I wasn't hosting a rodeo in the backyard. I was just feeding my animals, cleaning the stalls, and mending the same fences my grandfather had repaired year after year. But for Karen, it wasn't about noise or animals. It was about control, and the one thing my grandfather's land represented was her lack of it. The neighbors were a mixed bag. A few were openly supportive, especially the family next door with 2 kids who adored my horses and came over every other afternoon to watch me groom them. But others started acting weird. One guy yelled at me from his car to get rid of the stink. Another neighbor filed a complaint that my horses pooped too loud. I didn't even know that was a measurable offense. The HOA even tried to serve me with a livestock eviction notice, whatever that meant. It was printed off a Word document and taped to my barn door with what looked like duct tape. I left it there just to make a point, but deep down, I knew this wasn't going to just blow over. Karen wasn't the type to accept no. She saw my ranch as a blemish on her suburban vision board. And me, I had no intention of backing down. My grandfather didn't fight all those years just so I could let some self-appointed lawn cop dictate what I did on land we'd owned since before her house was even built. This wasn't just a fight over horses. It was a fight over freedom. And I was just getting started. The next act of HOA aggression came in the form of a gate. Not just any gate. A freshly installed, keypad-locked, 6-foot metal monstrosity right across the only road that led in and out of my property. I didn't even hear it being built. 1 minute I was mucking out the stalls, and the next I walked up my gravel drive to grab a feed delivery and slammed face first into welded steel. It had been bolted directly into the edge of the public road, cutting off my access entirely. There was even a smug little plaque screwed into one of the posts. Private Community Access Control, HOA Authority. My name wasn't on the keypad. My ranch wasn't in the system. I was completely boxed in. At first, I thought it was a prank, but when I called the delivery guy to explain why he couldn't reach the barn, he told me a couple of HOA guys in reflective vests had told him I was no longer an approved address. That's when I knew they were serious. They weren't just playing at harassment. They were declaring war. I called the sheriff. Not 911, just the local non-emergency line. They said someone would be out in a couple of hours. In the meantime, I had no choice but to climb through the fencing like some trespasser on my own property just to get to town. It was humiliating, but also infuriating. When the deputy finally showed up, he looked at the gate, then back at me. "They put this here today?" he asked. I nodded. He pulled out his phone and started snapping pictures. "That's obstruction of a public right-of-way," he muttered. "They're going to regret this." Karen arrived before he could even finish his report. She drove up in her cream-colored SUV like she was coming to host a ribbon cutting. "Officer," she said with that plastic smile, "is there a problem?" The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Did your HOA install this gate?" She launched into a long-winded explanation about neighborhood security and shared road costs and unregistered use of our infrastructure. The deputy cut her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am, this road is maintained by the county. You can't block off access to someone's private property without a court order. Remove it now." She tried to argue. Of course she did. Claimed the road had been informally annexed into the HOA charter. The deputy laughed. "There's no such thing as informal annexation." He handed her a printed citation for illegal obstruction and warned that if the gate wasn't down by sunset, the county would bring in a crew to dismantle it and send the bill to the HOA. Karen turned purple. I didn't say a word. I just smiled as the deputy shook my hand and left. The gate came down that afternoon, not with a whimper but with a tantrum. Karen stood at the edge of the driveway, yelling orders at 2 bored-looking contractors as they unbolted the frame. When they were done, she took a photo of the empty post holes like she was documenting a crime scene. That night, someone threw eggs at my barn. I knew it was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to find the water pressure in my barn had dropped to nothing. The horse's automatic watering system had stalled, and the main line from the pump house was bubbling out weird air spurts. I traced the problem to a blockage in the filter, packed with mulch of all things. It looked deliberate, like someone had dumped landscaping debris straight into my intake pipe. I replaced the filter and filed another police report. The pattern was becoming clear. When intimidation failed, sabotage followed. 2 nights later, I was woken up by a strange noise. Low, rhythmic wailing like a distant siren. I grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. Sure enough, 2 HOA-branded golf carts were doing slow circles around my back fence, headlights flashing, alarms going off. It was after midnight. The horses were panicked, stomping and pacing in their enclosures. I shouted for them to leave, but the carts just sped up, making another slow loop before disappearing back toward the neighborhood. The next morning, I found one of my hay bales slashed open. The inside was coated with some kind of oily substance that made the whole thing unusable. I took samples and brought them to a vet who confirmed it was most likely motor oil, deliberate contamination. That was enough for me. I ordered cameras, not just 1 or 2. I went full security freak, motion lights, trail cams, even a drone surveillance system with real-time alerts. If Karen and her HOA goons wanted to play dirty, I was going to catch them in the act. The footage I got that first week was better than any soap opera. The cameras caught Karen's husband, yes, Mr. HOA himself, creeping along the fence line with a flashlight, peering into my stable windows like a raccoon with a clipboard. Another night, one of the HOA board members pulled up in their car, walked right up to my front gate, and poured what looked like milk over the keypad box. I couldn't prove intent on everything, but I had enough to make a case for harassment and trespassing. I sent a cease and desist letter through my lawyer, addressed not just to Karen, but the entire HOA board. Included in the packet were color printouts of the security footage, screenshots of the harassment messages I'd received, and copies of the original zoning documentation. It was a legal bombshell, and it worked like one. 3 of the board members immediately stopped responding to Karen's emails. One even called me personally to apologize, claiming they had no idea what she was doing. But Karen, she doubled down. She started sending more formal notices, certified mail, email PDFs, even notes taped to my fence. Each one was more ridiculous than the last. Complaints about unauthorized pasture noise, claims that my weather vane was a visual pollutant, accusations that my barn lights violated neighborhood brightness standards. One particularly dramatic letter suggested my horses were agitating local dogs, leading to increased barking incidents. But all of that paled in comparison to what I received next. A manila envelope hand-delivered by someone in an ill-fitting polo shirt that said HOA Compliance Division. Inside was a letter claiming the HOA had opened an investigation into my property for environmental disruption, and that they were considering escalating the matter to the Environmental Protection Agency. That was the moment it stopped being petty. They were trying to destroy me. I spent that evening pacing my barn, watching my horses and trying to wrap my head around the insanity. This wasn't about manure or fences. This was personal. Karen wanted my land, or at least to control it. And if she couldn't win through fake fines and sabotage, she was clearly prepared to lie, fabricate, and threaten until I gave in. But that wasn't happening. If she wanted war, she was going to get one, and I had just begun sharpening my tools. The next logical step was to bring in the heavy artillery, not weapons, but legal firepower. I met with a land use attorney named Diana, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who looked like she could crush Karen's entire HOA with one raised eyebrow. I handed her the zoning maps, the original property deed, and every letter and photo I had accumulated since the fines began. She sat quietly, flipping through the pages for about 10 minutes before she set the folder down and smiled. "They're cooked," she said. "Not only are you outside their legal boundaries, but they violated multiple property access laws and that bogus $80,000 fine. That's not enforceable without jurisdiction. This is better than I expected." Diana drafted a formal legal notice the very next day, citing everything from boundary overreach to civil harassment. We mailed it certified to every member of the HOA board, including Karen. We also attached a preliminary draft of a lawsuit just to rattle the cage a little harder. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one in a courtroom with a judge who wouldn't care about aesthetic harmony or Karen's laminated bylaws. But Karen didn't fold. In fact, she escalated again. She started posting about me on the HOA Facebook group, claiming my horses carried disease, that I was stockpiling manure too close to homes, that the smell was affecting air quality. I didn't even have access to the group. But thankfully, one of the neighbors, Mrs. Winters, a sweet retired school teacher with a secret love of horses, sent me screenshots. There were dozens of angry posts, all from Karen, all spreading false information. I couldn't believe the lengths she was willing to go to just to vilify me. The bizarre part was that some of the neighbors started getting curious, not angry. The more Karen tried to paint me as some evil cowboy, the more people wanted to see for themselves. I had folks dropping by the ranch fence just to look at the horses. Kids waved when I rode past. A couple even asked if I gave lessons or did birthday parties. One guy offered to buy composted manure for his garden. Ironically, Karen's smear campaign made my ranch more popular than ever. Still, the damage was being done. My name was being slandered. My privacy was being invaded, and the stress of dealing with this daily insanity was taking its toll. Diana suggested a bold move. Attend the next HOA meeting and confront Karen directly in front of the entire community. I wasn't technically a member, but the easement that allowed road access also gave me the right to be present at board meetings. So I showed up. The meeting was held in the HOA clubhouse, an over-decorated room filled with pastel chairs and plastic plants. Karen stood at the front like she was addressing the United Nations. When I walked in, the room went quiet. A few people gave me curious looks. Others looked away entirely. Karen stopped mid-sentence and narrowed her eyes like I just tracked mud across her marble floor. "You're not a member of this association," she said coldly. "You have no standing here." I held up a copy of the easement agreement. "Actually, I do." Diana came with me. She wasn't just my attorney. She was also the storm I brought with me. She stood beside me as I rolled out a poster board with a high-resolution aerial zoning map of the neighborhood. "This," I said, pointing, "is the boundary of the HOA." Then I tapped on my ranch, which sat clearly outside the line. "And this is me, legally, completely, undeniably not part of your organization, which means every fine, every gate, every threat, none of it is enforceable." Karen sputtered. "You're causing public nuisance. People are complaining." Diana stepped forward. "That's a matter of opinion. What's not opinion is that you've committed multiple acts of trespass, defamation, and attempted interference with agricultural operations. We have photos, we have statements, and we have security footage." I pulled out a USB stick and handed it to the board secretary. "I suggest you review it, particularly the footage of your husband hopping my fence at 2:00 in the morning." The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, a couple of shocked laughs. Karen tried to regain control, banging a plastic gavel like it actually had power. "This is a disruption," she yelled. "He's attacking me." I kept my voice calm. "I'm defending my property, which I have every right to do. And unless this board wants to be named in a lawsuit for facilitating harassment, I suggest you stop letting this woman act on your behalf without a vote." One of the board members, a middle-aged man who had clearly had enough, finally spoke up. "Did you really send EPA complaints without telling us?" he asked Karen. She refused to answer. Another board member, a younger woman, turned to me and said, "I didn't know it had gotten this bad." I nodded. "It has, and I'm not backing down." After the meeting, several people approached me to apologize. One woman even brought her son to pet one of the horses the next day. I could tell the tide was starting to turn. Karen wasn't invincible. She was just loud. And once her lies were exposed, people stopped listening. But the real twist came a few days later when I dug a little deeper into my grandfather's old records. I found a file tucked away in his office labeled HOA History. Inside were letters, notes, and most surprisingly, A rejected offer from Karen herself. She had tried to buy the ranch from my grandfather 10 years ago, offered nearly double its market value at the time. The letter was polite, but unmistakably manipulative. She wanted to develop the land into a luxury garden club space. My grandfather wrote absolutely not in red ink across the top and never responded. It wasn't about noise or horses or fences. It had never been. Karen didn't hate the ranch. She wanted it. And when she couldn't buy it, she set out to destroy it. This wasn't an HOA conflict. It was a grudge festering for years and finally boiling over now that I had taken the reins. That realization lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about fighting back. It was about finishing the battle my grandfather started. I scanned the letter, added it to my legal file, and forwarded it to Diana. She was thrilled. "This gives us motive," she said. "It paints a clear picture of harassment with a financial incentive. The judge will eat this up." I wasn't sure about judges eating anything up, but I knew one thing for certain. Karen had made a critical mistake. She thought I was just a quiet rancher with no idea how to fight back. But now I had the law, the truth, and most importantly, her own words in writing. And I wasn't afraid to use them. A few weeks passed with an eerie quiet. It was the kind of stillness that didn't feel like peace, but the kind of silence just before a big storm. Karen had gone radio silent. No new letters, no fresh threats, no more gate nonsense or golf cart harassment. For a moment, I started to wonder if the pressure had finally gotten to her. Maybe the lawsuit drafts, public embarrassment, and evidence we gathered had made her back off. Maybe she was finally starting to understand that I wasn't going anywhere. But then the storm arrived, and it came wrapped in the scent of burning fireworks and cooked-up drama. It started with a birthday barbecue. Nothing crazy. A few close friends, some good food, and a fire pit to roast marshmallows. I'd cleared it with the county fire marshal ahead of time, followed all open burn protocols, even had fire extinguishers on hand just in case. What I didn't expect was for a fire truck to show up mid-meal with sirens blaring and lights flashing, only to stop at the edge of my ranch road and wait like someone had called them and then hung up. I walked over and asked what was going on. The fire captain scratched his head and told me they'd received an anonymous tip that I was burning tires and pallets next to livestock. When I explained what was really going on and showed him the clean fire permit and my little fire pit with nothing more than hickory logs, he laughed and shook his head. "We get these fake calls sometimes," he said, "but yours takes the cake." I asked if he knew who called. He shrugged. Dispatch logged it as a HOA safety complaint. The next day, my lawyer received a formal complaint from the HOA legal team, accusing me of hosting unauthorized public events without proper safety barriers or permits. They claimed I was running a business, charging for tours or parties, and therefore violating both HOA ordinances and county guidelines. They wanted an immediate cessation, and get this, an apology. Diana laughed so hard she choked on her coffee. "They're trying to paint you as a commercial operation now," she said between coughs. "They've gone from manure cetaceans to running a rogue fairground." We drafted a response that basically boiled down to prove it or shut it. But Karen wasn't done. Her next move was the dirtiest yet. I received another letter, not from the HOA this time, but from a regional environmental agency. It claimed there was an investigation pending regarding alleged contamination of a nearby water source. The letter referenced manure runoff, chemical spills, and livestock waste as the source of possible pollution. It was filled with formal language, citations, and a warning that non-compliance could lead to serious consequences. I was stunned, then furious. I immediately contacted the agency, provided documentation of my composting practices, soil reports, water testing results, all spotless. I even welcomed an inspection. The investigator who finally showed up was polite, but visibly confused. "This isn't what I expected," he said, looking around at the carefully maintained paddocks, clearly labeled compost zones, and my irrigation runoff filters. The report we received painted a very different picture. I asked who submitted it. He said it was an anonymous tip, but mentioned the wording of the complaint had been very formal, very rehearsed. The kicker? After testing the nearby creek water, they found a higher concentration of lawn fertilizer runoff originating not from my land, but from the HOA's own perfectly manicured green belts. At that point, the gloves came off. Diana filed the full lawsuit. It wasn't just about getting the HOA to back off anymore. It was about justice. We sued for harassment, defamation, property interference, and mental distress. We included Karen by name and added the HOA as an entity. We requested not just damages, but a formal restraining order preventing any future contact or attempts to fine me. The legal process began immediately, and subpoenas were issued. Karen panicked, not visibly, not publicly, but the HOA board began to unravel. 2 board members resigned within the week. Another sent me an email apologizing for everything and offering to write a sworn affidavit stating that Karen had acted without board consent on nearly every action taken against me. The email was gold. Diana called it a litigation gift basket. Karen, still trying to maintain her crumbling throne, hosted an emergency HOA meeting that I wasn't invited to but somehow still got the agenda for, thanks to Mrs. Winters. The entire meeting was about rogue landowners, restoring the sanctity of the community, and preventing the spread of livestock-based health threats. Her final pitch that the HOA create a special committee to lobby the county for rezoning my land under community development. She wasn't just trying to fine me anymore. She wanted to erase me. But that desperate move backfired. Turns out not only was my property exempt from HOA influence, but it also had a historical designation due to a barn built in the 1940s, one that had been featured in a local newspaper and documented by the State Agriculture Board. The rezoning attempt triggered a review, and the county board sent Karen a very sharp letter informing her that further attempts to annex or influence zoned farmland could result in legal penalties against her and the HOA. It was the final nail in her coffin, and she knew it. That week, I noticed a sudden change in Karen's behavior. Her SUV didn't slow roll past my fence anymore. Her security patrol golf carts vanished overnight. The passive-aggressive letters stopped. I knew something was up. Then, out of nowhere, I received a final notice from the HOA. It was printed on thick ivory paper and stamped in gold. I opened it, expecting some ridiculous final threat, but instead, it was a settlement offer. They wanted to drop all complaints, retract all fines, and pay me a sum in exchange for my agreement not to pursue further damages or public defamation claims. It wasn't the full amount Diana and I had calculated, but it was hefty, and it came with one additional request, that I agree not to speak publicly about the case or Karen's actions. I turned it down, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted it public. I wanted every HOA member who had suffered in silence to know they weren't powerless. I wanted every clipboard tyrant to think twice before threatening someone for growing tomatoes or owning chickens. Karen had declared war on my land, my horses, my livelihood, and my peace, and she lost. Instead of settling, we proceeded to court. Diana was relentless. The judge wasn't impressed by Karen's theatrics. She tried to argue that she was acting in the community's interest, but under cross-examination, she stumbled, especially when shown the old letter she'd written to my grandfather trying to buy the land. The courtroom went quiet when Diana laid it all out. Karen had wanted the land for herself. When she couldn't get it, she tried to destroy it. And now, thanks to her own arrogance, I was the one holding the reins. The courtroom was packed on the final day. A few reporters were seated in the back. Word of the case having leaked after the county board's letter became public record. Several curious residents from the HOA showed up too, some who had once supported Karen, others who simply wanted to witness the climax of what had become the community's most infamous feud. I sat quietly in the front, Diana beside me with her notes laid out like a general preparing for battle. Karen, seated across the aisle, looked different. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracked around the edges. Her hair was neater, her outfit more subdued, but no amount of tidy presentation could cover the weight of months of lying, posturing, and petty warfare. The judge entered, and we all stood. This was it. The trial didn't last long. Diana was surgical. She opened with a concise timeline of harassment, walking the court through each escalation. From the illegal gate to the bogus fines to the EPA complaint that had spectacularly backfired. She introduced our witnesses, the sheriff who removed the gate, the county inspector who confirmed our zoning, the fire marshal who debunked the false fire report, and even a representative from the environmental agency who testified that the only pollution detected came from HOA landscaping runoff. The evidence was overwhelming. Then came the footage. Diana played several clips from our camera system. The jury watched Karen's husband climb over the fence under the cover of darkness. They watched HOA board members linger near the barn with flashlights. They saw someone, still unidentified, smearing oil across the hay bales. One clip even showed Karen herself standing outside my fence, taking photos of the horses while loudly describing them as disease-ridden trash beasts to someone on the phone. There was no context in which her actions could be seen as justified. She looked like exactly what she was, obsessed and malicious. Her defense was weak. Her lawyer tried to paint me as uncooperative and disrespectful of the community's values. He argued that the HOA had a duty to uphold standards and that Karen had acted in good faith. But under cross-examination, Karen cracked. Diana asked her about the offer she made to buy the ranch from my grandfather. Karen claimed she barely remembered it. Diana handed her a printed copy. "Is that your signature?" she asked. Karen said, "Yes. And this line where you refer to the ranch as an untapped gem of potential. Was that you too?" Karen nodded hesitantly. Diana smiled. "So you wanted this land for yourself, couldn't get it, and then decided to force compliance through illegitimate HOA action." Karen's lawyer objected. The judge overruled it. Karen didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence told the jury everything. The ruling came quicker than anyone expected. The judge declared all HOA fines null and void, citing jurisdictional overreach. He then addressed the harassment, the trespassing, the fake citations, the environmental fraud. He ruled in my favor and awarded damages, not the full $250,000 we'd initially asked for, but more than enough to make the message clear. This kind of abuse of power wouldn't be tolerated. Karen was personally fined. The HOA was ordered to pay restitution, and most importantly, a permanent injunction was placed preventing the HOA or any of its representatives from interfering with my ranch ever again. Karen tried to appeal. Of course she did, but her credibility was gone, and her allies on the board were vanishing like cockroaches under a flashlight. Within a month, she resigned. The announcement came via a short, bitter letter posted to the HOA website. She blamed ongoing hostility and lack of support from weak-minded board members. It didn't matter. She was out, and the damage was done. Life changed fast after that. I used part of the settlement money to fix up the barn, repaint the house, and build a new training arena out back. Not for profit, just something my grandfather always wanted to do. A few neighbors who had once kept their distance started showing up at the fence with smiles instead of complaints. Kids came to feed the horses carrots and ask about riding lessons. I didn't charge them a dime. Just seeing their faces light up was payment enough. But the real cherry on top came when I took some of the leftover funds and built a big new sign for the front gate. I mounted it on a thick wooden frame, polished it until it gleamed, and placed it right next to the mailbox where Karen once staked her infamous violation notice. The sign read, "Morgan Ranch, Agricultural Zone. Horses welcome. Karen's not." Within a week, it became a local photo spot. People started stopping by just to take selfies in front of it. One guy even asked if he could get it printed on a t-shirt. I said sure, as long as he sent me one. Karen moved out not long after. The house went up for sale quietly, and the listing didn't mention her name. I heard through the grapevine that she relocated to another HOA-controlled community upstate. I wondered if she'd start her nonsense all over again or if this whole experience had humbled her. Either way, she was someone else's problem now. Mine was solved. One morning, I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address, no name, just a plain white envelope with my name scrolled in a familiar shaky hand. I opened it on the porch, half expecting another threat. But it wasn't that. It was from Karen, a real letter. In it, she apologized, sort of. She said she still believed she was acting in the community's best interest, but admitted she may have overstepped. She wrote that she shouldn't have let personal feelings influence administrative action. It wasn't heartfelt, not really, but it was something. I didn't reply. I just folded the letter, stuck it in a drawer, and went about my day. That afternoon, I saddled up Thunder, my grandfather's old gelding, and rode the perimeter of the property. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting everything gold. The horses were calm, the fields were green, the wind was gentle. I paused near the fence, looked out over the horizon, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Complete peace. This land was mine, legally, spiritually, completely. And no HOA, no Karen, no clipboard warrior could ever take that away again. My grandfather would have been proud. I didn't just hold the line. I pushed it back. I made sure his legacy wasn't buried under suburban politics and power trips. The ranch still stood, stronger than ever. And now it wasn't just my sanctuary. It was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes when you stand your ground long enough, the storm passes and leaves you stronger in its wake.